Emily Reynolds had always been careful about her evening runs through the quiet streets of San Diego. The tree-lined avenues and well-lit sidewalks of her neighborhood created an illusion of security that she never fully trusted. The September air carried a slight chill as twilight descended over the city, perfect conditions for her rigorous 3-mile route. What her neighbors didn't know was that the petite woman in form-fitting running gear who passed their homes each evening carried skills that could neutralize threats most civilians couldn't even imagine. The 28-year-old had spent 6 years serving as one of the first female Navy SEALs, completing missions in some of the world's most dangerous locations. Her compact frame and unassuming appearance had been assets during covert operations, allowing her to blend into crowds and move undetected through hostile territories. Now working as a private security consultant, she maintained her rigorous training regimen, treating each evening run as both exercise and tactical preparation. Emily stretched against her apartment building's brick wall, checking her fitness tracker while planning her usual route. She tucked her dark hair under a baseball cap and began her steady pace down Maple Street. Her breathing controlled her senses, automatically scanning her surroundings. The neighborhood was typical for this part of San Diego: modest single-family homes with small front yards, older couples walking dogs, and the occasional teenager skateboarding past. She had chosen this area specifically because it felt safe and normal, a stark contrast to the high-stress environments she'd grown accustomed to during her military service. As she turned onto Pine Avenue, Emily noticed a dark sedan parked at the corner with its engine running. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside, but something about the vehicle's positioning triggered her tactical instincts. It was parked in a way that provided quick access to multiple escape routes while maintaining clear sight lines of the street intersection. She made a mental note of the license plate and continued running, but kept the car in her peripheral vision. Years of training had taught her that situational awareness wasn't paranoia, it was survival. The sedan remained stationary as she passed, but she could feel eyes tracking her movement. 3 blocks later, Emily realized the same vehicle was now behind her, moving slowly and maintaining distance. The driver was following her route, stopping when she stopped at traffic lights and accelerating when she picked up pace. Her heart rate increased, but not from the physical exertion of running. Emily took an unexpected right turn onto a residential side street, testing whether the vehicle would follow. Sure enough, the sedan made the same turn 30 seconds later. She was definitely being followed, and whoever was in that car was being deliberate about it. Rather than panic, Emily's military training kicked in. She began mentally cataloging escape routes, potential weapons, and defensive positions. The quiet residential street offered limited options, but she spotted an alley between 2 houses that could provide cover if needed. Emily reached into her running belt for her phone, intending to make a call, but hesitated. Her finger hovered over the familiar number of William "Bull" Harrison, her former commanding officer and mentor. The 62-year-old retired SEAL had been a constant presence in her life since she'd first entered the grueling Buds training program, where many had expected her to fail. Harrison had seen her potential when others saw only her gender. Instead of calling, Emily sent a quick text with her location and the sedan's license plate. No need for additional explanation. Harrison would understand the implications immediately. She continued running at a steady pace, not wanting to alert her followers that she detected their surveillance. Through her peripheral vision, she watched the sedan maintain its distance. The situation felt calculated and professional, suggesting this wasn't a random crime of opportunity. A memory flashed unbidden: Afghanistan 3 years ago, moving through a darkened village with Harrison and her unit, the weight of responsibility for her team's lives heavy on her shoulders. The sensation now was eerily similar: the heightened awareness, the controlled breathing, the mental preparation for what might come. As Emily approached the end of the residential block, she noticed the sedan accelerating slightly. Her instincts told her that whatever was about to happen would occur within the next few minutes. The quiet street, minimal foot traffic, and approaching darkness created ideal conditions for an ambush. Her phone vibrated with Harrison's response. Triangulating your position. 2 potential extraction points marked. Activate tracking protocol. Stay alive, Reynolds. The message brought a grim smile to Emily's lips. Typical Harrison, concise, tactical, and with absolute faith in her abilities. The sedan's engine grew louder as it approached. Emily could see 2 silhouettes in the front seats and a third in the back. She maintained her running pace while calculating distances to potential cover and escape routes. Every muscle in her body was coiled and ready to react, her mind switching into the tactical mode that had kept her alive during countless dangerous missions. As she neared the intersection ahead, Emily realized she was about to discover whether her years of elite military training would prove as effective on home soil as they had been in foreign war zones. The sedan suddenly accelerated and pulled alongside her, its passenger door flying open before the vehicle had completely stopped. Three men jumped out with practiced efficiency that told her immediately this was a coordinated operation, not a random street crime. The first man was tall and muscular, wearing dark clothing and moving with the fluid precision of someone with military or law enforcement background. The second was smaller, but carried himself with the same professional demeanor. The third hung back slightly, hand inside his jacket, clearly serving as backup. Both men positioned themselves to cut off her escape routes, demonstrating tactical awareness that made Emily's blood run cold. "Don't run, lady. We just want to talk," the larger man called out, but his tone carried an underlying threat that contradicted his words. His right hand rested near his waistband in a way that suggested he was armed. Emily stopped running and turned to face them, her breathing controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She quickly assessed their positioning, noting that they'd left themselves exposed to counterattack if she moved quickly enough. Their confidence suggested they viewed her as an easy target, a lone woman out for an evening jog. "What do you want?" Emily asked, keeping her voice steady, while her mind calculated attack angles and defensive options. She shifted her weight slightly, preparing for explosive movement while appearing to comply with their demands. The smaller man pulled out a manila envelope and held it up. "We have some photos we think you'll be interested in seeing. Pictures of your apartment, your car, your daily routine. Someone's been watching you, Emily Reynolds." The use of her full name confirmed this wasn't a random encounter. Someone had researched her, planned this confrontation, and sent these men to deliver a message. Emily's mind raced through possibilities: disgruntled former targets from her military service competitors in the private security world, or clients who'd become unhappy with her services. She maintained her neutral expression, giving nothing away as she continued to evaluate the situation. "You're going to look at these photos, and then you're going to listen very carefully to what we have to say." The larger man continued, taking a step closer. His accent was slight but detectable, Eastern European, possibly Russian. Combined with their professional approach and surveillance capabilities, this suggested involvement with organized crime or foreign intelligence services. Either possibility meant she was dealing with people who wouldn't hesitate to use lethal force. Someone wants to have a conversation with you, and they're not the type of person who accepts no for an answer. The man's lips curled into what might have been intended as a reassuring smile but came across as predatory. "I'm not getting in any car with you," Emily said firmly, noting that the sedan's engine was still running and the third person remained in the driver's seat. "If someone wants to talk, they can make an appointment like civilized people." The smaller man laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You don't understand the situation you're in. This isn't a request. Our employer has invested considerable time and money tracking you down, and they're not interested in your convenience." As he spoke, the larger man moved closer now, within arm's reach of Emily. She could see the outline of a pistol under his jacket and noticed he favored his left leg slightly, suggesting an old injury that could be exploited in close combat. "Last chance to cooperate voluntarily," the man said, reaching into his jacket. "Our employer prefers to handle these situations diplomatically, but they've authorized us to use alternative methods if necessary." Emily's training kicked in as she realized the conversation was about to turn violent. She shifted her stance imperceptibly, preparing to strike, while maintaining the appearance of a frightened civilian. These men had made a critical error in underestimating her capabilities. The larger man's hand emerged from his jacket, holding a black Glock 19 pistol, which he pointed directly at Emily's head. The cold metal pressed against her temple, and for a microsecond she felt a flash of genuine fear, not of death, but of leaving missions unfinished, of letting down the people who depended on her. "You're coming with us right now. Walk to the car slowly. Keep your hands visible, and don't try anything stupid." His breath smelled of cigarettes and coffee, his eyes cold and professional. "I understand," Emily said, raising her hand slightly while taking a small step forward. To the men, it appeared she was complying with their demands. In reality, she was moving into optimal striking distance while positioning herself to use their overconfidence against them. The smaller man walked toward the sedan, to open the rear door, confident that his partner had the situation under control. The larger man relaxed slightly, believing that the gun pressed to Emily's head had eliminated any resistance. Neither man realized they were about to discover why threatening a Navy SEAL was one of the worst tactical decisions they could have made. Emily took another step forward, now close enough to strike. The larger man's pistol was pressed against her temple, but his grip was casual rather than combat-ready. His attention was divided between watching her and monitoring his partner's movement toward the car. In that moment of divided attention, Emily made her move. Years of elite training that had taught her that the first few seconds of any engagement determined the outcome. These men were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Emily's movement was explosive and precise. In one fluid motion, she grabbed the gunman's wrist with her left hand while driving her right elbow into his solar plexus. The impact drove the air from his lungs and caused him to double over. But more importantly, it angled the pistol away from her body. Before he could recover, Emily twisted his wrist in a direction nature never intended, applying a joint lock that sent waves of excruciating pain up his arm. The weapon clattered to the pavement as his grip involuntarily released. The entire disarmament took less than 2 seconds. The smaller man spun around at the sound of his partner's grunt of pain, his hand reaching for his own weapon, but Emily was already moving. She drove her knee into the larger man's face as he bent forward, the impact producing a sickening crack that indicated a broken nose at minimum. Using the falling man's body as a shield, Emily rolled behind him as the second gunman cleared his pistol from its holster. The bullet intended for her struck his partner in the shoulder, instead causing him to scream and collapse completely. Emily scooped up the first pistol and dove behind a parked car as the second gunman fired again. The bullet shattered the vehicle's rear window, sending glass fragments raining down around her. She could hear him moving, trying to get an angle for a clear shot. "You crazy bitch!" he shouted, his professional composure completely shattered. "Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Emily remained silent, using her ears to track his position while scanning for tactical advantages. The residential street offered limited cover, but she noticed a fire hydrant that could provide protection if she could reach it. More importantly, she could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had called the police after hearing gunshots. The driver of the sedan had exited the vehicle and was approaching from her left flank, also armed. Now she faced two opponents with weapons, while armed only with the pistol she'd taken from the first attacker. The tactical situation had improved, but she was still outnumbered. Emily checked the weapon in her hands, a Glock 19 with a full magazine, professional equipment, which confirmed these weren't street criminals, but trained operatives. She chambered around and prepared to engage multiple targets simultaneously. "Listen carefully," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "I'm a former Navy SEAL with 6 years of combat experience. Your partner is bleeding and needs medical attention. Walk away now and nobody else gets hurt." The response was immediate gunfire from both remaining attackers. Bullets sparked off the car's metal body and shattered more windows. Emily waited for a pause in their firing, then popped up and sent 2 precise shots toward the second gunman's position. Her rounds found their target. The man cried out and stumbled backward, clutching his leg. The driver immediately took cover behind the sedan, his confidence clearly shaken by watching his 2 partners get neutralized in less than a minute. "This isn't over," the driver shouted. "You have no idea what you've just started." Emily could hear him dragging the wounded second gunman toward the car. The sirens were getting closer, and she realized the attackers were going to attempt an escape rather than continue the engagement. Part of her wanted to pursue and capture all 3 men, but the tactical situation was still too dangerous. She heard car doors slamming and the sedan's engine revving. The driver was abandoning the first gunman, who lay unconscious in a growing pool of blood from his shoulder wound and broken nose. The sound of squealing tires indicated they were fleeing the scene. Emily remained in cover until the vehicle noise faded, then carefully approached the wounded man on the ground. He was unconscious but breathing, his shoulder wound bleeding steadily, but not immediately life-threatening. She retrieved the manila envelope the men had mentioned and quickly examined its contents. Inside were indeed surveillance photos of her apartment, her car, and her daily routines. Someone had been watching her for weeks, documenting her patterns and vulnerabilities. The final photo made her blood run cold. It showed her entering the offices of Sentinel Security, consulting the private military company, where she'd been negotiating a lucrative contract. Written on the back in red ink was a simple message: cancel the contract, or next time we won't just talk. The sirens were now very close, and Emily could see flashing lights reflecting off nearby windows. She quickly photographed the message with her phone before the police arrived, knowing she'd need evidence of the threat. As the first patrol car rounded the corner, Emily raised her hands and carefully placed the pistol on the ground. She'd won this encounter, but the message and surveillance photos made it clear this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Detective James Anderson had seen his share of street violence during 15 years with the San Diego Police Department, but the scene that greeted him on Pine Avenue was unlike anything in his experience. A lone woman in running gear had somehow disarmed and incapacitated an armed man using what appeared to be military-level combat techniques. Emily sat calmly on the curb, allowing a paramedic to clean minor cuts on her hands while uniformed officers secured the crime scene. Her composure was remarkable for someone who just survived a violent encounter, answering questions with the precise detail of someone trained in tactical debriefing. So you're telling me this man and his two companions approached you with weapons that attempted to force you into their vehicle, and you defended yourself using hand-to-hand combat training? Anderson asked, reviewing his notes. That's correct, Emily replied. I served 6 years as a Navy SEAL. When the first man pointed a pistol at my head, I disarmed him using standard close-quarters combat techniques. The situation escalated when his partners opened fire. Anderson had already run Emily's background through the police database. Her military record was impressive but heavily redacted, with most details classified except for her honorable discharge and commendation records. The woman sitting before him was clearly much more than she appeared. Military, huh? Anderson nodded, his expression softening slightly. Marine Corps myself, 2 tours in Germany during the Berlin Wall fall. Nothing like what you SEALs do, though. Emily studied the detective's face, noting the subtle shift in his demeanor. The shared military background established an unspoken connection, an understanding of duty discipline, and the unique perspective that came from serving one's country. The wounded gunman had been transported to the hospital under police guard, but preliminary identification had already come through on Anderson's radio. The news made the detective's investigation much more complicated. Miss Reynolds, I need to ask you directly. Anderson lowered his voice. Is there any reason Anton Barkov, a known associate of the Bratva, would want to kidnap you? That's the Russian organized crime syndicate operating along the West Coast. Emily hesitated before answering. The surveillance photos and threatening message suggested this was connected to her potential contract with Sentinel, but she needed to understand the full scope of the threat before involving law enforcement. I work as a private security consultant, she explained. It's possible that my professional activities have attracted unwanted attention from criminal organizations, but I can't think of any specific reason for this attack. Anderson sensed there was more to the story, but pressing a decorated veteran who just survived an armed assault wouldn't yield results. Instead, he focused on the evidence collected from the scene. The manila envelope contained sophisticated surveillance materials that suggested professional intelligence gathering capabilities. The equipment used by the attackers was high-end, and their tactical approach indicated military or law enforcement training. We're going to need you to stay available for follow-up questions, Anderson said, handing Emily his business card. In the meantime, I'd strongly recommend taking additional security precautions. If these people targeted you once, they might try again. Emily nodded, but she was already planning her next moves. The attack confirmed that someone viewed her potential Sentinel contract as a serious threat to their interests. She needed to understand why that contract was worth killing for. After giving her statement and being cleared by the paramedics, Emily returned to her apartment building. She approached her front door with extreme caution, checking for signs of forced entry or surveillance devices. Her military training had taught her that after one attack, the threat level remained elevated indefinitely. Inside her apartment, Emily immediately swept for listening devices and hidden cameras. The surveillance photos proved her home had been compromised, and she couldn't assume it was secure. After confirming no electronic surveillance was present, she picked up her secure phone and dialed a number she rarely used but never forgot. Harrison, a gruff voice answered on the first ring. It's Reynolds. We need to meet. Pikes Point, 1 hour. Emily kept the call brief, mindful of potential electronic surveillance she might have missed. Acknowledged. Come heavy. The line went dead. Emily moved quickly, removing a floorboard in her bedroom closet to reveal a hidden compartment containing a Sig Sauer PU2 spare magazines, a tactical knife, and a small medical kit. She strapped the holster to her ankle, concealed the knife at her waist, and placed the medical kit in her jacket pocket. The items brought a familiar comfort tools of a trade she had never truly left behind. Pikes Point was a secluded area of the former Naval Training Center, now largely abandoned but still occasionally used by retired military personnel who valued its privacy. William Bull Harrison was already waiting when Emily arrived, his imposing figure silhouetted against the fading sunset. At 62, the former SEAL commander remained physically intimidating, his weathered face a map of hard-earned experience. He'd been Emily's mentor, her harshest critic, and ultimately her strongest advocate throughout her military career. "You look like hell, Reynolds," Harrison said by way of greeting, his keen eyes assessing her condition. "You should see the other guys," Emily replied with a grim smile, then briefed her former commander on the evening's events, emphasizing the professional nature of the attack and the Russian connection. Harrison listened without interruption, asking pointed questions about the surveillance materials and tactical approach used by the attackers. "This sounds like it goes beyond simple criminal activity," he concluded. "Russian organized crime groups don't typically target former special operations personnel unless there are larger strategic interests involved. What can you tell me about this Sentinel contract?" Emily explained that Sentinel had approached her about leading security operations for major energy facilities in Eastern Europe. The contract would involve protecting critical infrastructure from terrorist attacks and industrial sabotage work that would put her in direct conflict with criminal organizations operating in the region. "That explains the Russian interest," Harrison said grimly. "Those energy facilities represent billions of dollars in revenue that flows through territories controlled by various criminal syndicates. If you successfully secure those installations, you'd be cutting off major income streams for very dangerous people." The implications became clear to Emily. This wasn't just about one contract. It was about challenging criminal organizations that had been operating with impunity for years. The attack tonight was a warning, but if she proceeded with the Sentinel contract, the threats would escalate dramatically. Harrison pulled out a small tablet and showed Emily a series of photos, Russian men in expensive suits meeting with officials in various European capitals. "These are members of the Volkov Brotherhood, former KGB, some of them. They operate under the guise of legitimate business, but they're essentially a shadow intelligence service with connections to Russian government officials." Emily studied the photos, committing the faces to memory. "How do you have access to this intelligence? You've been retired for years." A rare smile crossed Harrison's face. "Some of us old Cold Warriors never really stopped fighting. I've maintained certain relationships over the decades, habits from another era." The mention of the Cold War brought a flash of recognition. "That's why they sent someone with an Eastern European accent. They're playing by an old rulebook, intimidation tactics straight from the Soviet era." Harrison nodded. "These guys learned their trade during a time when the lines between state intelligence and organized crime were particularly blurred. And now, with tensions rising again between East and West, they're leveraging those old networks. I need you to forward all the evidence to my contacts immediately," Harrison continued. "This might require coordinated response from multiple agencies. And Emily, until we understand the full scope of this threat, you should consider yourself a high-value target." After ending their meeting, Emily sat in her car and considered her options. She could walk away from the Sentinel contract and probably avoid further confrontation, or she could proceed knowing that doing so would put her in conflict with criminal organizations willing to use lethal force to protect their interests. The choice would determine not just her professional future, but potentially her survival. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Detective Anderson called to inform her that Anton Barkov had died during emergency surgery at San Diego General Hospital, taking with him any chance of learning who had ordered the attack. "His associates will likely view you as responsible for his death," Anderson warned. "We're increasing patrols in your neighborhood, but you should consider relocating temporarily." Emily thanked him for the information but had already made other arrangements. She spent the morning at a secure facility used by former military personnel for high-risk meetings. The warehouse-like building in an industrial district offered multiple escape routes and sophisticated counter-surveillance equipment, making it ideal for sensitive discussions. At exactly 1,000 hours, Michael Sullivan, Sentinel's regional director, arrived for their scheduled meeting. Sullivan was a former Marine colonel with extensive experience in international security operations, and his expression suggested he understood the gravity of the situation. "Miss Reynolds, I'll be direct." Sullivan began, settling into a metal chair across from Emily. "We're aware of last night's incident, and we understand if you want to withdraw from consideration for the Eastern Europe contract." Emily studied Sullivan's face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. The Sentinel contract was worth over $2 million annually, but the personal risk had escalated beyond anything she'd anticipated when negotiations began. "Tell me exactly what this contract involves," Emily said. "I need to understand why Russian criminals are willing to kill to prevent me from taking it." Sullivan opened a classified briefing folder and spread several documents across the table. The materials revealed details about energy infrastructure in Ukraine, Romania, and Poland that were far more sensitive than Emily had been initially told. "The facilities you'd be protecting aren't just commercial energy installations," Sullivan explained. "They're critical components of NATO's energy security strategy in Eastern Europe. If these facilities are compromised, it could destabilize the entire region's power grid and give Russia significant leverage over European allies." The strategic importance explained everything. Emily wouldn't just be protecting corporate assets, she'd be safeguarding infrastructure vital to Western security interests. Criminal organizations with ties to Russian intelligence services would view her contract as a direct threat to their operational capabilities. The previous security contractor was killed in a car bombing in Budapest 3 months ago. Sullivan continued. "Hungarian authorities concluded it was an accident, but we believe it was a targeted assassination. You'd be walking into an active war zone where the enemy has already demonstrated willingness to use lethal force." Emily absorbed this information while calculating the risks and potential benefits. The contract would provide financial security for years, but it would also make her a permanent target for sophisticated criminal organizations with international reach. "What kind of support would Sentinel provide?" she asked, focusing on practical considerations rather than emotional reactions to the threat. Sullivan outlined a comprehensive security package, including armed backup teams, intelligence support, and extraction capabilities if operations became compromised. The resources were impressive, but Emily knew that even the best support couldn't eliminate all risks in hostile territory. Her secure phone rang during the briefing. The caller ID showed Harrison's number, and Emily answered immediately. "Reynolds, we've identified the organization behind last night's attack," Harrison said without preamble. "It's the Volkov Brotherhood, one of the most powerful Russian crime syndicates. They control energy smuggling operations throughout Eastern Europe, and your Sentinel contract would directly threaten their revenue streams." The name sent a chill through Emily. The Volkov Brotherhood wasn't just organized crime, they were a shadow intelligence service with capabilities rivaling legitimate government agencies. They had access to military-grade weapons, sophisticated surveillance technology, and corrupted officials throughout multiple countries. "There's more," Harrison continued. "Intelligence suggests they've placed a substantial bounty on your head. Taking the Sentinel contract would essentially declare war on an organization with unlimited resources and no moral constraints." Sullivan had obviously heard enough of the conversation to understand the implications. His expression grew increasingly grave as Harrison detailed the Brotherhood's capabilities and their history of eliminating security contractors who threatened their operations. After ending the call, Emily sat in silence for several minutes. The choice before her was clear: accept a lucrative but potentially lethal contract, or walk away and spend the rest of her life wondering if she'd let criminals intimidate her into abandoning her principles. "I need 24 hours to make a decision," Emily told Sullivan. "This goes beyond professional considerations into questions of personal survival." Sullivan nodded understandingly. "I'll keep the position open, but I need an answer by tomorrow evening. The facilities in Eastern Europe can't remain unprotected much longer." As Sullivan gathered his materials and prepared to leave, Emily's mind was already working through the tactical challenges she'd face if she accepted the contract. The Volkov Brotherhood had resources and motivation, but they'd also made a critical error. They'd underestimated her capabilities and revealed their intentions prematurely. If she decided to take the contract, Emily knew she'd need to strike first and eliminate the threat before they could organize a more sophisticated attack. The question was whether she was prepared to wage a private war against one of the world's most dangerous criminal organizations. The answer would determine not just her future, but potentially the security of critical infrastructure that millions of people depended on for their daily lives. Emily Reynolds spent the night analyzing intelligence reports that Harrison had forwarded through secure channels. The Volkov Brotherhood's operations were more extensive than she'd imagined, with tentacles reaching into legitimate businesses, government agencies, and military contractors throughout Europe and North America. By dawn, her decision was made. She'd spent 6 years defending American interests against foreign threats, and she wasn't about to let Russian criminals intimidate her into abandoning that mission. The Sentinel contract represented an opportunity to protect critical infrastructure while striking a significant blow against organized crime. At 0800 hours, Emily called Michael Sullivan and accepted the contract. Her first deployment would begin in 2 weeks, giving her time to prepare for what would essentially be a sustained combat operation against a well-funded and highly motivated enemy. "I'm glad you decided to move forward," Sullivan said, relief evident in his voice. "I'll begin arranging your security team and intelligence support immediately. You'll have access to the best resources Sentinel can provide." Emily's preparation was meticulous and comprehensive. She spent the following days acquiring specialized equipment, studying blueprints of the facilities she'd be protecting, and developing contingency plans for various attack scenarios. Her apartment was transformed into a tactical planning center with maps, communications equipment, and weapon storage. Harrison provided ongoing intelligence support, sharing intercepts that revealed the Brotherhood's efforts to infiltrate her operation before it began. They'd already attempted to place assets within Sentinel's support structure and were actively recruiting local criminals in Eastern Europe to assist with planned attacks. "You've got a hell of a fight ahead of you," Harrison said during one of their secure briefings. He spread satellite imagery across Emily's kitchen table, pointing out known Volkov Brotherhood facilities near the energy installations she'd be protecting. "These guys aren't just thugs with guns. They've got military training, intelligence capabilities, and government connections." Emily studied the images carefully. "We've faced worse odds before." Harrison's weathered face creased with concern. "Not like this, kid. In Afghanistan, we had the full weight of the U.S. military behind us. This time, you're essentially a private contractor stepping into a shadow war." "I know the risks," Emily replied, meeting his gaze. "But someone has to stand up to these people. If we let them intimidate us into backing down, they win without firing a shot." Harrison nodded slowly, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Your father would have said the same thing." The mention of her father brought a sharp pang of memory. Captain James Reynolds had served under Harrison in the early days of the SEALs, dying in a classified operation when Emily was just 14. His death had shaped her life's trajectory, leading her to follow in his footsteps despite the challenges she faced as a woman entering the elite special forces. "There's something I need to tell you," Harrison said, his voice unusually hesitant. "Something about your father and why the Volkov Brotherhood might have a particular interest in you beyond the Sentinel contract." Emily felt a chill run through her body. "What are you talking about?" Harrison pulled out an old, worn photograph from his wallet. It showed a younger version of himself standing next to Emily's father, both in civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of military men. Between them stood a third man, tall and aristocratic, with piercing eyes. This man was Mikhail Volkov, the original founder of the Brotherhood. Before the Soviet Union collapsed, he was KGB, specializing in sabotage operations against Western infrastructure. Your father and I worked with him briefly during a period of cooperation between our agencies. When the wall fell, Mikhail went rogue, using his KGB connections to build one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in Eastern Europe. Emily stared at the photograph, trying to process this new information. "What does this have to do with me?" "Your father's last mission, the one where he died, was an operation to eliminate Mikhail Volkov after he orchestrated an attack on a U.S. embassy. The mission succeeded, but your father paid the ultimate price. Mikhail's son Victor now runs the Brotherhood, and he spent years hunting down everyone connected to his father's death." The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. "You're telling me this isn't just about the Sentinel contract. It's personal." Harrison nodded grimly. "I believe they only recently discovered the connection. The attack the other night wasn't just a warning, it was reconnaissance confirming your identity before making a more serious move. By taking this contract, you are walking into the crosshairs of a man who's wanted revenge against your family for over a decade." Emily sat back absorbing this new reality. The stakes had just risen exponentially. Why didn't you tell me this before? Most of it was classified even from me until recently. I've been pulling strings with old contacts trying to piece together why the Brotherhood would target you so specifically. Harrison's voice was heavy with regret. If I'd known sooner, I might have advised you differently about the Sentinel contract. Emily stood up and walked to the window looking out at the San Diego skyline. Far below, people moved through their normal lives unaware of the shadow war unfolding around them. After a long silence, she turned back to Harrison. It doesn't change my decision. If anything, it makes it more important that I see this through. My father gave his life to stop these people. I won't dishonor his sacrifice by backing down now. Harrison studied her face, seeing the same determination he had once seen in her father. Then we need to adjust our strategy. This isn't just about protecting energy infrastructure anymore. It's about dismantling the Brotherhood before they can get to you. For the next week, Emily and Harrison worked to identify Volkov Brotherhood assets within the United States. They established a secure communication protocol and developed a network of trusted contacts who could provide support if needed. Emily underwent refresher training in advanced close-quarters combat techniques and counter-surveillance methods, pushing her body to its limits in preparation for what lay ahead. On her final day in San Diego, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Detective Anderson arrived at her apartment with news that changed everything about her understanding of the situation. We arrested 2 more Russian operatives this morning, Anderson reported. They were conducting surveillance on your building and had detailed plans for another kidnapping attempt. Emily invited him inside, noting that Anderson looked more haggard than when she'd last seen him, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd been working overtime on the case. During questioning, one of them revealed something significant. Anderson continued accepting the coffee Emily offered. The Brotherhood's interest in you goes beyond the Sentinel contract. They've been tracking you for months, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Did they mention why? Emily asked, careful not to reveal that she already knew the answer. Only that you're considered a high-priority target for Viktor Volkov personally. The operative claimed Volkov has a blood debt to settle with your family. Anderson studied her reaction. Does that mean anything to you? Emily considered how much to share. Anderson had proven himself trustworthy, and having an ally in law enforcement could be valuable. My father was involved in an operation against the Brotherhood years ago. It appears Viktor Volkov holds me responsible for his family's losses. Anderson let out a low whistle. This means they'll continue targeting you even if you abandon the Sentinel contract. You're facing a permanent threat that won't disappear until either you're eliminated or their organization is neutralized. The revelation actually simplified Emily's strategic thinking. Since the Brotherhood intended to kill her regardless of her professional decisions, she might as well take the lucrative contract and use Sentinel's resources to wage war against them on favorable terms. I appreciate you bringing this to me personally, Emily said. Most detectives wouldn't go out of their way like this. Anderson shrugged. Military looks after its own. My unit taught me that much. He hesitated before adding, I've requested additional resources for this investigation, but I'm hitting bureaucratic roadblocks. Someone's interfering with the case from above. Emily's instincts flared. What kind of interference? Evidence disappearing from lockup. Surveillance footage conveniently corrupted. Interview transcripts altered. Anderson's expression was grim. I've been a cop long enough to recognize the signs. Someone with significant influence doesn't want this investigation to proceed. The Brotherhood has penetrated local law enforcement, Emily concluded. Anderson nodded. Or they have compromised someone with enough authority to obstruct justice. Either way, I can't guarantee official protection for you anymore. Whatever you're planning, you need to assume that the Brotherhood has eyes and ears within the system. After Anderson left, Emily contacted Harrison with the new information. His response was immediate and decisive. They needed to accelerate their timeline and eliminate the Brotherhood's local assets before departing for Eastern Europe. That evening, they met at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a location Harrison had used for clandestine operations during his active duty days. Emily was surprised to find another person waiting with Harrison, a muscular man in his early 30s, with the watchful eyes of a veteran operator. This is Ryan Miller, Harrison said by way of introduction. Former SEAL served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He was part of the team that extracted you after the Kandahar operation. Emily remembered the mission, a high-risk extraction under heavy fire, where she'd been separated from her unit and surrounded by enemy combatants. A SEAL team had fought their way through to retrieve her, though in the chaos she'd never learned all their identities. "You pulled me out of that compound," she said, recognition dawning. Miller nodded. "You'd held off 12 hostiles with limited ammunition and a broken radio. I figured anyone who could do that deserved a ride home." "Ryan's been working private security contracts since leaving the service," Harrison explained. "He's also been tracking the Volkov Brotherhood's activities for personal reasons. They killed my partner during an operation in Poland last year," Miller said, his voice flat. "Made it look like an accident, but I know their handiwork. I've been building a case against them ever since." Emily understood immediately why Harrison had brought Miller into their circle. They weren't just preparing for a security contract anymore. They were assembling a team for a counter-offensive against the Brotherhood. The three spent hours developing a plan to neutralize the immediate threat before Emily's deployment. Miller had identified a Volkov safe house in San Diego where the Brotherhood coordinated their local operations. With Anderson's information about law enforcement penetration, they couldn't risk official channels. This would have to be a private operation conducted with plausible deniability. "This is dangerously close to violating federal law," Emily pointed out, though her tone suggested she'd already accepted the necessity. Harrison's response was typical of his pragmatic approach to combat ethics. "Sometimes you have to step outside the system to protect it. These people aren't playing by any rulebook. If we wait for official authorization, you'll be dead before the paperwork clears." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than a direct assault on the safe house, they would use surveillance and electronic intrusion to identify the Brotherhood's communication channels, then plant false information to draw out their operatives. Rather than killing them, they would capture and interrogate key figures to map the Brotherhood's network. For the next 3 days, they maintained continuous surveillance on the safe house, identifying patterns and personnel. Miller's expertise with electronic intelligence gathering proved invaluable as he established a backdoor into the Brotherhood's communication systems. "They're planning another move against you," Miller reported after intercepting an encrypted message. "Two-man team scheduled for tonight. They're planning to plant an explosive device on your vehicle." "Perfect timing," Harrison said. "We'll be waiting for them." That night, Emily sat in her darkened apartment, watching through specialized optics as two men approached her car in the building's underground parking garage. They moved with professional caution, checking for surveillance before proceeding to place what appeared to be an explosive device beneath the vehicle. "Targets in position," she whispered into her secure radio. "Execute," came Harrison's terse reply. The garage lights suddenly went out, plunging the area into darkness. Before the men could react, Miller and Harrison moved in from opposite directions, using night vision equipment to maintain tactical advantage. The operation was swift and silent, with both targets subdued and sedated before they could alert their colleagues. The men were transported to the warehouse where they were secured for interrogation. Emily had insisted on humane treatment, even for people who had tried to kill her. They weren't just fighting the Brotherhood, they were demonstrating the difference between their methods and those of their enemies. The interrogation yielded critical intelligence. Through a combination of psychological pressure and strategic deception, they learned that the Brotherhood had indeed placed a mole within the San Diego Police Department, a detective named Kozlov, who had been feeding information to the Russians for years. "That explains how they've stayed ahead of the investigation," Emily said as they reviewed the information. "With Kozlov monitoring police activity, they'd know about any official moves against them." "We need to turn this over to Anderson," Miller suggested. "He can handle the internal investigation without compromising our operation." Emily agreed, arranging a secure dead drop to provide Anderson with the evidence without connecting it to their unauthorized activities. With the immediate threat identified, they turned their attention to the broader strategic picture. The interrogation had revealed something even more disturbing. The Brotherhood's plan extended far beyond Emily and the Sentinel contract. They had orchestrated a sophisticated campaign to compromise multiple energy security projects across Eastern Europe, with the goal of maintaining their stranglehold on regional power distribution. "This isn't just about criminal profit," Harrison observed. "This has all the hallmarks of a state-sponsored operation using organized crime as cover. The question is, which state is pulling the strings?" The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing intercepted communications, Miller discovered references to a senior Russian government official codenamed Patriarch, who provided political protection and intelligence support to the Brotherhood's operations. If we're up against state actors, Emily said, we need to adjust our approach. This isn't just about personal security anymore. It's a matter of national interest. Harrison nodded grimly. I'll activate some old contacts in intelligence. They need to know what we're dealing with here. As their planning intensified, Emily received a call from Sullivan at Sentinel. The company had detected unusual activity around their secure communications network, suggesting a potential breach. Multiple security personnel had reported being approached by individuals offering substantial bribes for information about the Eastern Europe contract. The Brotherhood is casting a wide net, Emily told Harrison after the call. They're trying to compromise our operation before it even begins. Classic Soviet-era tactics, Harrison replied. Penetrate, compromise, and subvert. Viktor Volkov may be a criminal, but he learned his tradecraft from the old KGB playbook. The situation reached a critical point 2 days before Emily's scheduled departure. Anderson called with alarming news. Detective Kozlov had discovered their investigation and fled, but not before accessing secure files containing details of Emily's travel plans and security arrangements. The Brotherhood will know exactly when and how you're leaving the country, Anderson warned. They'll be waiting for you. Emily convened an emergency meeting with Harrison and Miller. We need to change our approach. If they're expecting me to follow the official Sentinel deployment plan, we use that as misdirection. You're thinking of a decoy operation, Harrison said, immediately grasping her intent. Exactly. We let the Brotherhood think I'm following the original plan while we take an alternate route. We can use their expectation against them, potentially drawing out more of their operatives in the process. Miller nodded approvingly. Set a trap using yourself as bait. High risk, but it could give us the opportunity to identify more of their network. The revised strategy required precise coordination. Sentinel would proceed with the official deployment plan, complete with his security team escorting a decoy who resembled Emily from a distance. Meanwhile, Emily, Harrison, and Miller would travel separately via a classified military transport arranged through Harrison's connections. If the Brotherhood takes the bait, Emily explained, they'll commit resources to an operation against the decoy team. When it fails, they'll be exposed and vulnerable. And if they don't take the bait, Miller asked. Emily's expression was grim. Then we know we're dealing with an adversary sophisticated enough to see through our deception. Either way, we learn something valuable about our enemy. The night before the operation, Emily stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city she'd called home. Tomorrow she would leave for a conflict zone of a different kind. Not the deserts of Afghanistan or the mountains of remote terrorist strongholds, but the shadowy battlefields of Eastern Europe, where criminality and statecraft blurred into a single dangerous entity. Harrison joined her, offering a glass of rare scotch he'd been saving for significant occasions. To your father, he said, raising his glass. He'd be proud of the warrior you've become. Emily raised her glass in response. And to the mission ahead. They drank in companionable silence, two soldiers preparing for battle, as they had done countless times before. After a while, Harrison spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of something long unsaid. There's something else you should know about your father's final mission. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I was there, Emily. I was the mission commander when James died. Emily turned to face him, surprised. You never told me that. It was classified beyond top secret. Still is technically. Harrison looked down at his glass, swirling the amber liquid. Your father volunteered for the most dangerous part of the operation, infiltrating Mikhail Volkov's inner circle to confirm his location before the strike team moved in. When Volkov discovered his true identity, your father fought his way out, but not before ensuring the mission's success. Emily absorbed this new information about her father's sacrifice. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know exactly what you're walking into. Viktor Volkov doesn't just want revenge for his father's death, he wants revenge specifically against your family, because your father was the one who made the mission possible. This isn't just professional for him, it's deeply personal. Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. I couldn't save your father that day. I've carried that failure with me for 14 years. I won't fail you, Emily. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The moment was interrupted by Miller's arrival with final updates on their travel arrangements. The military transport was confirmed with departure scheduled for 400 hours from a private airfield outside the city. Intelligence indicated that the Brotherhood had indeed focused their surveillance on the official Sentinel deployment route, suggesting they had taken the bait. As final preparations were completed, Emily received one last piece of intelligence from Anderson. The detective had been digging deeper into the Brotherhood's San Diego operations and discovered something unexpected. A high-end private security company called Talon Group had been receiving substantial payments from shell companies linked to the Brotherhood. Talon Group provides executive protection for several energy companies competing with Sentinel's clients, Anderson explained. It looks like the Brotherhood has been diversifying their approach using both criminal intimidation and legitimate corporate competition to maintain their influence. This revelation added another dimension to Emily's understanding of the conflict. The Brotherhood wasn't just a criminal organization using brute force. They were sophisticated operators leveraging both legitimate and illegitimate means to achieve their objectives. Corporate espionage, criminal intimidation, and state-sponsored intelligence operations, Emily summarized for Harrison after Anderson's call, we're facing a hybrid threat that operates across multiple domains. Harrison nodded. Welcome to modern warfare, Reynolds. The lines between criminal, corporate, and state actors have never been more blurred. In Eastern Europe, you'll be fighting on all these fronts simultaneously. The final hours before departure were spent in methodical preparation. Weapons were cleaned and checked, communications equipment tested, and contingency plans reviewed. Emily packed light, but comprehensively following the lessons learned during years of special operations. Bring only what you need, but ensure what you bring will not fail when needed most. At 03:30 hours, they departed for the airfield in separate vehicles, taking different routes to minimize the risk of being tracked. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible above the city's glow-good conditions for their clandestine departure. Emily arrived first, parking at a designated spot near the private terminal. As she stepped from her vehicle, the hairs on the back of her neck stood up, an instinctive warning honed through years of combat operations. Something was wrong. The airfield appeared deserted, with only minimal security lighting illuminating the tarmac. The military transport was visible in the distance, dark and silent. No ground crew, no security personnel, none of the activity that should precede a departure. Emily reached for her secure radio, intending to alert Harrison and Miller, when she spotted movement at the edge of her vision, a shadow detaching from the darkness near the terminal building. Then another and another. At least 6 figures moving with tactical precision to surround her position. Her instincts had been correct. Despite their precautions, the Brotherhood had discovered their alternate plan. The question was, who had betrayed them? Emily drew her sidearm and took cover behind her vehicle, simultaneously activating her radio. Ambush at the airfield. Multiple hostiles. Position compromised. Harrison's voice came back immediately, terse and focused. Hold position. 5 minutes out. The shadows continued to advance, moving from cover to cover with professional discipline. These weren't ordinary criminals. They moved like special forces operators, maintaining overlapping fields of fire as they closed the distance. Emily calculated her options. She was outnumbered and in an exposed position with limited cover. Direct confrontation would be suicidal, but surrender wasn't an option given the Brotherhood's intentions. She needed to create space and time for Harrison and Miller to arrive. She identified the fuel storage area 50 meters to her right. If she could reach it, the maze of tanks and pipes would provide better cover and more maneuvering room than her current position. The challenge would be covering the open ground between. Taking a deep breath, Emily removed a small device from her pocket, a tactical flashbang grenade she'd kept from her SEAL days. One of the many pieces of equipment that wasn't strictly legal for civilian possession, but had proven its value in countless operations. She activated the grenade and threw it high and far to her left, creating an arc that would land well away from her intended escape route. The diversion worked perfectly. When the device detonated with a blinding flash and deafening bang, all attention turned toward the explosion. Emily seized the moment, sprinting for the fuel storage area, while her attackers were momentarily disoriented. She made it halfway before the first shots rang out, bullets sparking off the tarmac near her feet. Diving behind the nearest fuel tank, she returned fire, not aiming to hit, but to force her pursuers to take cover and slow their advance. The radio crackled with Miller's voice. coming in from the east side, can provide covering fire in 30 seconds. Negative, Emily responded, aware of the danger posed by gunfire near fuel storage. Area too volatile. Maintain distance and prepare for extraction. She could hear her attackers coordinating their approach, communicating in rapid Russian as they established a perimeter around the fuel storage area. They were being careful, methodical. They wanted her alive, at least initially. Viktor Volkov would want the satisfaction of dealing with her personally. Emily used their caution to her advantage, moving deeper into the labyrinth of tanks and pipes. In the darkness, with her knowledge of stealth tactics, she could maintain the initiative despite being outnumbered. A voice called out in accented English. "Mrs. Reynolds, there is nowhere to go. The airfield is surrounded. Your friends cannot reach you. Surrender now, and no one else needs to be hurt." She recognized the voice. It belonged to the third man from the sedan, the driver who had escaped during their first confrontation. His tone was reasonable, almost sympathetic, making the lethal intent behind his words all the more chilling. Emily didn't respond, instead using the sound of his voice to pinpoint his location. He was approaching from the north side, likely with others flanking from east and west to cut off her retreat options. Standard encirclement tactics executed with professional precision. Her radio vibrated silently against her chest, a predetermined signal from Harrison. They were in position and ready to execute their contingency plan. Emily reached into her pocket and removed a small remote detonator, a backup measure they had prepared for worst-case scenarios. The plan had always recognized the possibility of betrayal or compromise. As a precaution, Harrison had placed explosive charges on a fuel truck parked at the far end of the airfield, away from the main terminal and aircraft. Not enough to cause catastrophic damage, but sufficient to create a major distraction if needed. Emily pressed the detonator. The night sky erupted with fire as the fuel truck exploded, sending a column of flame and smoke into the air. The blast temporarily illuminated the entire airfield, revealing the positions of her attackers as they instinctively turned toward the explosion. In that moment of revelation, Emily saw what they were up against: at least 12 armed men in tactical gear, with communication equipment and night vision capabilities. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a full-scale operation planned with military precision. The explosion had its intended effect, creating chaos and confusing the Brotherhood's carefully coordinated approach. Emily used the distraction to break from cover and sprint toward a maintenance building that would provide better protection than the fuel tanks. As she ran, gunfire erupted from multiple directions, not just from her pursuers, but also from Harrison and Miller's positions at the perimeter. The carefully orchestrated ambush was devolving into a chaotic firefight, exactly as they had planned. Emily reached the maintenance building and took a defensive position near the entrance, her weapon ready, as she assessed the changing tactical situation. Through her radio, she could hear Harrison and Miller coordinating their movements, using their superior knowledge of SEAL team tactics to maximum advantage, despite being outnumbered. 3 down on the east perimeter. Miller reported, his voice calm despite the intensity of the situation. Moving to position, Bravo. 2 more at the north entrance, neutralized, Harrison added. Reynolds, what's your status? Secure in the maintenance building southwest corner, Emily replied. At least 7 hostiles still active in the vicinity. The radio suddenly crackled with a new voice, Detective Anderson. Reynolds, be advised, police units responding to reports of an explosion. ETA 3 minutes. Suggest immediate extraction. The unexpected communication momentarily confused Emily. Anderson shouldn't have known about their operation or had access to their secure frequency. Unless... Who compromised our communications? She demanded. No one, Anderson replied. Harrison gave me emergency access as a failsafe. I've been monitoring since you left the city. The sound of approaching sirens confirmed his report. The explosion had drawn attention they couldn't afford, especially with questions about law enforcement penetration still unresolved. They needed to leave immediately or risk being caught in a situation that would be difficult to explain legally. Fall back to extraction point, Charlie, Harrison ordered. Anderson, can you delay the first responders? Already on it, the detective confirmed. Rerouted 2 units to a false report across town, but you've got minutes at most. Emily moved cautiously toward the back of the maintenance building, finding a service door that led toward their designated extraction point, a secondary airfield access road, where Miller had positioned a backup vehicle. As she emerged from the building, the night erupted with gunfire once more. A bullet grazed her arm, tearing through her jacket and drawing blood. Emily dropped into a crouch, returning fire at the muzzle flashes, visible in the darkness. Taking fire from multiple positions, she reported. Path to extraction blocked. Hold position, Harrison responded. Creating diversion now. Seconds later, another explosion rocked the airfield as Harrison detonated a second set of charges. This one was smaller, but placed strategically near the Brotherhood's vehicles, disabling their transportation and forcing them to reconsider their priorities. Emily seized the opportunity, sprinting toward the extraction point, while Harrison and Miller provided covering fire. The coordinated teamwork reflected years of shared training and operational experience, each member anticipating the other's movements without need for explicit communication. She reached the access road and found the backup vehicle, a nondescript SUV, with reinforced armor and specialized equipment concealed beneath its civilian appearance. Miller arrived seconds later, breathing hard but moving with purpose as he took the driver's position. Harrison, we're at extraction. What's your position? Emily called into her radio. A burst of static was the only response. Harrison, report? She repeated, a note of urgency entering her voice. After an agonizing pause, Harrison's voice came through, strained and breathless. Pinned down at the north perimeter. Multiple hostiles between my position and extraction. You need to go now. Negative, Emily responded immediately. We're not leaving you. That's an order, Reynolds. Harrison's voice hardened with command authority. Complete the mission. I'll find another way out. Emily hesitated, torn between military discipline and personal loyalty. Harrison had been more than a commander to her. He'd been mentor, protector, and the closest thing to family she had left. Bull, I'm not leaving you behind. Not after what you told me about my father. There was a moment of silence before Harrison responded, his voice softer. Your father would say the same thing, Emily. The mission comes first. Always has, always will. Now go. That's a direct order. Before she could respond, the radio erupted with the sound of intense gunfire, followed by Harrison's voice shouting instructions to unseen allies. Then silence. Miller touched her arm, his expression grim but resolute. We have to go. Police will be here any minute, and we can't help him if we're arrested. Emily knew he was right, but the knowledge did nothing to ease the weight of the decision. She nodded once, sliding into the passenger seat as Miller started the engine. As they accelerated away from the airfield, Emily looked back at the chaos behind them, flashing lights, billowing smoke, and the distant figures of men in tactical gear sweeping the area. Somewhere in that maelstrom was William Harrison, the man who had guided her career, protected her secrets, and connected her to her father's legacy. We'll find him, Miller promised, reading her thoughts. But first we need to understand how they knew about our plans. Someone betrayed us, and until we know who, we can't trust anyone. Emily turned away from the window, her expression hardening into the focused determination that had carried her through the most challenging missions of her career. The Brotherhood had just made their most significant mistake, yet they had taken someone she cared about. What had been a professional conflict had now become deeply personal. They wanted a war, she said quietly. Now they're going to get one. As they drove into the darkness, leaving San Diego behind, Emily made a silent promise to Harrison and to her father's memory. The Volkov Brotherhood had escalated the conflict to a new level, but they would soon discover why threatening a Navy SEAL, especially this Navy SEAL, was a mistake they wouldn't live to regret. The military transport aircraft cut through the night sky above the Atlantic, its engines a steady drone that had become the soundtrack to Emily's troubled thoughts. 36 hours had passed since the ambush at the San Diego airfield, with no word from Harrison. The Sentinel security team had been notified of the situation and instructed to proceed with the original mission, while Emily and Miller pursued a modified approach. We'll land at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, Miller explained, spreading a map across the cargo hold's makeshift table. From there, we'll take a less obvious route to Poland ground transportation. Multiple vehicles, randomized patterns. His finger traced the circuitous path they would follow. If the Brotherhood is watching the usual entry points, they won't see us coming. Emily nodded, appreciating the tactical soundness, while her mind remained partially focused on Harrison's fate. Any word from Anderson? Nothing concrete. San Diego PD found evidence of a firefight at the airfield, but no bodies. Some blood traces that don't match any of the Brotherhood operatives they apprehended. Miller's expression remained carefully neutral. Harrison's a survivor, Emily. If anyone could escape that situation, it's him. She knew Miller was right. William Harrison hadn't survived 40 years of special operations by being easy to kill, but the uncertainty gnawed at her, compounding the weight of their current mission. We need to operate under the assumption that our entire operational security has been compromised, Emily said, refocusing on the immediate challenge. New protocols, new communication channels, new contacts. Already implemented, Miller confirmed. I've activated some old friends from my SEAL days who are stationed in Europe. People we can trust who aren't connected to Sentinel or our original plan. The mention of trust brought them back to the critical question that had haunted them since the ambush: who had betrayed their operation. Someone with intimate knowledge of their plans had informed the Brotherhood, allowing them to prepare the elaborate trap at the airfield. It has to be someone close to the operation, Emily reasoned. Someone with access to our timetable and extraction route. The list is short, Miller agreed. Sullivan at Sentinel, Anderson at SDPD, or someone in Harrison's network of old intelligence contacts. Emily shook her head. Anderson warned us about the police response. If he was working for the Brotherhood, he would have let us get captured. Unless it was misdirection, Miller countered. Get us to trust him by appearing to help only to set us up later. The aircraft hit turbulence, jolting them momentarily and serving as a physical reminder of the uncertain path ahead. For now, they would proceed with maximum caution, trusting no one outside their immediate circle until they could verify loyalties. As the transport began its descent toward Ramstein, Emily received a secure message on a backup communications device, one that hadn't been part of their original operational plan. The sender ID showed only a series of numbers that she immediately recognized as map coordinates. We've got a contact signal, she told Miller, showing him the device. Location in southern Poland, near the Ukrainian border. Miller studied the coordinates. That's less than 50 miles from the energy facility we're supposed to protect. Coincidence. There are no coincidences in our line of work. Emily checked the timestamp on the message. Sent 6 hours ago. Could be. Harrison could be a trap. Either way, we need to check it out, Miller said, but carefully. They landed at Ramstein under false identities provided by Miller's contacts, former special operations personnel, now working in military intelligence. The cover story identified them as security consultants conducting an assessment of Eastern European energy infrastructure, which was close enough to the truth to be sustainable under scrutiny. Their ground transportation consisted of an unmarked SUV with diplomatic plates not technically legal, but effective at avoiding unwanted attention from local authorities. The vehicle had been modified with reinforced armor, specialized communications equipment, and a hidden compartment containing weapons and tactical gear. We'll head east through Germany, then cross into Poland near Wrocław, Miller said as they departed the base. From there, we'll split up and approach the coordinates from different directions. If it's a trap, they won't be expecting us to arrive separately. Emily agreed with the strategy. Division of forces created vulnerability in conventional military operations, but in their current situation, outnumbered and potentially surrounded by hostile actors, unpredictability was their greatest tactical advantage. The journey through Germany was uneventful, the Autobahn allowing them to cover significant distance while maintaining a low profile among the flow of commercial traffic. As they approached the Polish border, Emily received another message on the secure device. Patriarch active. Primary target compromised. Require immediate assistance. The message was followed by new coordinates slightly different from the first set. They're moving, Emily observed. And they mentioned Patriarch. That's the code name for the Russian official connected to the Brotherhood. Miller frowned. How would Harrison know about Patriarch? We only discovered that connection after he was captured. The inconsistency raised Emily's suspicions. This could be someone using Harrison's protocols to lure us in, or it could be Harrison feeding us intelligence he's gathered since his capture, Miller countered. Either way, we proceed with maximum caution. They crossed into Poland near midnight, the border checkpoint, a perfunctory affair thanks to their diplomatic credentials. Once clear of the border zone, they split up as planned, Miller continuing in the SUV, while Emily transferred to a motorcycle provided by one of their local contacts. The Polish countryside was a patchwork of darkness, broken occasionally by small towns and industrial facilities. Emily followed back roads and farm tracks, avoiding main roads where surveillance would be concentrated. The motorcycle's quiet electric engine allowed her to move with minimal sound signature, essential for the approach to the mysterious coordinates. She reached the designated area shortly before dawn, a forested region surrounding an abandoned Soviet-era military installation. From her concealed position at the perimeter, Emily conducted a careful surveillance sweep, identifying multiple heat signatures inside the main building. "I've got eyes on the target," she reported to Miller via their encrypted communication system. "At least 6 individuals inside the main structure. No visible security perimeter, which feels wrong for a Brotherhood operation." "Agreed," Miller responded from his position on the opposite side of the facility. "I'm detecting electronic signals consistent with surveillance equipment, but it's concentrated inside rather than around the perimeter. Almost like they're monitoring something within the facility rather than watching for external threats." "Or someone," Emily suggested. "Could be where they're holding Harrison." They established observation positions and continued monitoring for 3 hours, noting personnel movements and searching for patterns that might indicate the nature of the operation. The facility appeared to be functioning as a temporary outpost rather than a permanent base. Minimal equipment, no heavy weapons, and a rotation of personnel suggesting short duration shifts. "I count 8 individuals total," Miller reported. "Regular patrol pattern inside the perimeter, but no external security. They're either extremely confident or extremely careless. Or they want us to think it's poorly defended," Emily countered. "Could be another trap." As the morning progressed, they observed a black SUV approaching the facility. The vehicle's windows were tinted, making it impossible to identify the occupants, but the deliberate way it moved suggested importance. "New arrival," Miller noted. "VIP transport based on the security formation." The vehicle stopped at the main entrance, and 4 armed guards emerged from the facility to establish a protective cordon. The SUV's rear door opened and a tall figure stepped out, a man in his 50s with silver hair and the rigid bearing of someone with military training. Emily used her high-powered optics to capture images of the man's face, running them through the secure database Miller had provided. The match was immediate and alarming. "Alexei Volkov," she whispered. "Victor's uncle and the Brotherhood's chief of operations in Eastern Europe." "If he's here personally, this is significant," Miller responded. "Alexei doesn't leave his compound in Belarus for routine matters." They continued observing as Alexei entered the facility, the guards closing ranks behind him. Whatever was happening inside was clearly important enough to warrant the presence of senior Brotherhood leadership. "We need to get inside," Emily decided. "If Harrison is in there, this might be our only chance to extract him before they move him again." "And if he's not," Miller asked, "then we gather whatever intelligence we can about Alexei's operation and exfiltrate. Either way, we're not leaving empty-handed." They spent the next hour developing a tactical approach. The facility's age and state of disrepair offered multiple entry points, but also created challenges: unstable structures, potential traps, and limited knowledge of the interior layout. They settled on a 2-pronged infiltration. Emily would enter through a maintenance tunnel identified in the old Soviet blueprints Miller had accessed, while Miller would create a diversion at the main power distribution panel on the opposite side of the complex. As they prepared for the operation, Emily's secure device received another message, a single word this time: "Abort." She showed it to Miller, who frowned. "Could be Harrison warning us away. Or someone trying to prevent us from discovering what's inside," Emily countered. "We proceed as planned, but with heightened awareness." They moved into position as dusk approached, using the gathering darkness for additional cover. Miller placed remote detonated charges at the power distribution panel, designed to create a significant electrical failure without causing structural damage or casualties. Emily positioned herself at the entrance to the maintenance tunnel, a narrow concrete passage that had once carried steam pipes throughout the facility. The tunnel was damp and partially collapsed in sections, requiring her to navigate carefully to avoid noise or further structural damage. "In position," Miller confirmed over their comm system. "Initiating diversion in 3, 2, 1. The facility plunged into darkness as the power failed, emergency lights flickering weakly as backup systems struggled to engage. Emily heard shouts of alarm and the sound of booted feet moving in coordinated patterns, professional security personnel responding to the unexpected crisis. She used the distraction to advance through the tunnel, emerging into a basement storage area that appeared largely untouched since the Soviets abandoned the facility decades earlier. Rusting equipment and moldering furniture created a labyrinth of obstacles and potential hiding spots. Emily moved silently through the basement, her night vision equipment providing a green-tinted view of her surroundings. She could hear movement on the floors above, guards searching for the source of the power failure, their voices echoing through the concrete structure. She located a service stairwell and ascended carefully, pausing at each landing to check for threats. The building's first floor appeared to be functioning as an operational center, with communications equipment and tactical planning materials visible through partially open doors. A voice speaking Russian caught her attention, not the clipped, professional tones of security personnel, but the measured cadence of someone giving a briefing. Emily moved closer, positioning herself near a doorway where she could observe without being seen. Inside, Alexei Volkov stood before a digital display showing detailed schematics of an industrial facility. Emily recognized it immediately, the NATO energy installation she had been contracted to protect. Surrounding Alexei were several men in civilian clothing, but with the unmistakable bearing of military officers. The primary security team will arrive tomorrow, Alexei was saying in Russian, which Emily understood from her military language training. Their protocols are known to us thanks to our source within Sentinel. The secondary facility remains vulnerable during the transition period. Emily's suspicions were confirmed. Someone within Sentinel had betrayed their operation to the Brotherhood. Moreover, the Brotherhood wasn't just planning to disrupt her security contract. They were preparing a coordinated attack on the NATO energy infrastructure. She needed to document this intelligence and exfiltrate immediately. Using her secure device, Emily began capturing images of the briefing and the tactical displays, transmitting them directly to Miller and their secure server. As she worked, movement at the far end of the room caught her attention, a side door opening to admit two guards escorting a prisoner. The man was battered but unbowed, his wrists bound, but his bearing defiant despite obvious signs of rough treatment. William Harrison. Emily felt a surge of relief at seeing him alive, immediately tempered by the reality of their situation. Harrison was being held in the heart of a Brotherhood operation surrounded by armed guards and senior leadership. Extraction would be extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, with their limited resources. Harrison's eyes scanned the room with the situational awareness of a veteran operator. For a brief moment, his gaze seemed to fix on Emily's position, though she knew her concealment should have prevented visual detection. A slight nod, so subtle it might have been imagined, suggested he had somehow sensed her presence. "Ah, our guest of honor," Alexei greeted Harrison with false cordiality. "I trust your accommodations have been satisfactory?" Harrison's response was typically defiant. "5-star compared to some places I've stayed. The room service could use improvement." Alexei laughed without humor. American humor, always inappropriate to the situation. He gestured toward the tactical display. "I wanted you to see this, Commander Harrison, to understand that your protégé's mission was compromised before it began. Our operation will proceed regardless of your interference or hers." "If you're so confident, why am I still breathing?" Harrison challenged. "You could have killed me at the airfield." "Death would be too simple," Alexei replied. "You have value it as leverage should Ms. Reynolds prove difficult to manage. And of course, Victor has personal matters to discuss with you regarding his father's death." Emily continued documenting the exchange while assessing tactical options. Direct intervention was too risky. She was outnumbered and outgunned, and any attempt to free Harrison would likely result in both their deaths. The priority had to be securing the intelligence about the planned attack and exfiltrating to warn the NATO security forces. As if sensing her dilemma, Harrison spoke again, his words seemingly directed at Alexei, but carrying a hidden message. "You should know something about Navy SEALs, particularly the ones I trained. When the primary objective is compromised, they don't hesitate to adapt. The mission always comes first." It was a clear instruction: proceed with the mission, don't risk everything for a rescue attempt. The same message he had given at the airfield, reinforced now in circumstances that left no room for misinterpretation. Emily acknowledged the direction with a mixture of professional acceptance and personal frustration. Harrison was right. The intelligence about the planned attack on NATO infrastructure took priority over a high-risk rescue operation with minimal chance of success. She completed her documentation of the briefing materials and began a careful withdrawal, intending to rendezvous with Miller at their designated extraction point. As she moved through the shadowy hallway, a guard appeared unexpectedly from a side room, nearly colliding with her. The encounter left no option but immediate action. Emily moved with practiced efficiency, striking the man's throat to prevent him from calling out before sweeping his legs and driving him to the floor with controlled force. The guard's head struck the concrete with a dull thud, rendering him unconscious but still breathing. The brief struggle had created noise, not enough to alert the entire facility, but potentially sufficient to draw attention from nearby personnel. Emily quickened her pace, heading for the service stairwell she had used earlier. She was halfway down the stairs when an alarm sounded harsh and insistent, triggering an immediate response from security personnel throughout the building. Whether from discovery of the unconscious guard or some other security breach, her window for clean exfiltration had closed. "Cover blown," she reported to Miller over their comm system. "Facility on high alert. Moving to extraction point, Bravo." "Acknowledged, brother." Miller responded, his voice tense but controlled. "I've secured transport. ETA 3 minutes to your location." Emily reached the basement level as the first security team entered the stairwell above her. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off concrete as she dove behind a rusted boiler for cover. The confined space amplified the sound of the weapons, creating a deafening cacophony that made communication impossible. She returned fire with measured precision, not attempting to kill, but to create covering fire that would allow her movement toward the maintenance tunnel. Her SEAL training emphasized economy of action, every shot, every movement calculated for maximum effect with minimal expenditure of energy. The security team faltered in their advance, clearly unprepared for the level of resistance from a single opponent. Emily used their hesitation to throw her last flashbang grenade, the explosive device, creating a disorienting combination of blinding light and deafening sound in the confined stairwell. She sprinted for the maintenance tunnel while her adversaries were incapacitated, disappearing into the narrow passage seconds before reinforcements arrived. The tunnel's confined dimensions worked to her advantage now, forcing pursuers to come at her single file and limiting their ability to bring superior numbers to bear. Emily emerged from the tunnel into the gathering darkness, immediately taking cover behind a collapsed section of perimeter fencing. The facility was in full lockdown, floodlights sweeping the grounds as armed personnel established a security perimeter. "Position compromised," she updated Miller. "Facility locked down. Need alternate extraction." "Moving to your location," Miller responded. "Southeastern perimeter near the old guard tower. I've created an opening in their security cordon." Emily moved carefully through the darkness, using the overgrown vegetation and abandoned equipment as cover. The Brotherhood's security forces were professional, but unfamiliar with the terrain, their search patterns leaving gaps that an experienced operator could exploit. She reached the designated extraction point just as Miller arrived in their backup vehicle, a weathered farm truck that blended perfectly with the rural surroundings. Emily slipped into the passenger seat, and they accelerated away from the facility, lights off and engine straining as Miller pushed the ancient vehicle to its limits. "Harrison is alive," she reported as they put distance between themselves and the facility. "Being held as leverage against us and scheduled for transfer to Viktor Volkov personally." Miller processed this information with professional detachment. "Extraction possibility. Minimal with our current resources. He's under heavy guard in the central section of the facility, with Alexei Volkov personally overseeing security." Emily's frustration was evident despite her controlled tone. "But I gathered critical intelligence. The Brotherhood is planning a coordinated attack on the NATO energy facilities using information provided by a mole within Sentinel." "Sullivan," Miller suggested. "Possibly, or someone close to him with access to our operational plans." Emily reviewed the images she had captured, transferring them to Miller's secure tablet. "The attack is scheduled to coincide with the regular security team's arrival tomorrow. They're targeting something called the secondary facility during the transition period." Miller studied the tactical displays Emily had documented. "This is a major operation, multiple teams, coordinated strikes, inside knowledge of security protocols. They're not just trying to disrupt the security contract, they're planning to physically destroy key infrastructure, potentially affecting energy supplies across Eastern Europe," Emily concluded. "This goes beyond criminal profit-seeking. It's a strategic strike against NATO capabilities in the region." They drove in silence for several minutes, each processing the implications of what they had discovered. The Brotherhood's operation had the hallmarks of state-sponsored asymmetric warfare, using criminal organizations as proxy forces to achieve geopolitical objectives without direct attribution. "We need to warn the NATO security team," Emily decided, "and identify the mole within Sentinel before they can compromise any more operations." "I have contacts at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw," Miller offered. people who can get a message to NATO command without going through potentially compromised channels. And they abandoned the farm truck at a prearranged location, transferring to a commercial delivery van provided by one of Miller's local contacts. The vehicle offered better protection and communications capabilities essential for coordinating their next moves. Emily established a secure connection to their emergency server, uploading the intelligence gathered from the Brotherhood facility. The data would be automatically forwarded to trusted contacts in U.S. intelligence, creating a backup in case they were compromised before reaching NATO representatives. As they approached Warsaw, Miller received an encrypted message from his embassy contact. An immediate meeting had been arranged with NATO security officials at a safe house in the city's diplomatic district. "We have a 90-minute window," Miller explained. "After that, they'll proceed with their original deployment plan, regardless of our intelligence." The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a building favored by diplomatic staff, secure, anonymous, and protected by diplomatic immunity that prevented local authorities from interfering. They arrived with 15 minutes to spare, undergoing rigorous identity verification before being admitted to a Spartan meeting room where three individuals waited. Emily recognized William Scott Sentinel's European Operations Director immediately. The other two were NATO security officials, a Norwegian colonel named Larson and a British intelligence liaison identified only as Mercer. "Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Miller," Scott greeted them with evident relief. "We'd begun to fear the worst when your scheduled transport failed to arrive." Emily studied Scott carefully, searching for any indication that he might be the mole within Sentinel. His demeanor appeared genuinely concerned, but years in covert operations had taught her that sincerity could be convincingly feigned. "We have a significant security breach," she began without preamble, connecting her secure device to the room's display system. The tactical information from the Brotherhood facility appeared on the screen, including images of Alexei Volkov and his planning materials. "The Brotherhood is preparing a coordinated attack on the NATO energy facilities, specifically targeting what they referred to as the secondary facility during tomorrow's security transition period." Emily highlighted the relevant sections of the intelligence. "They have detailed knowledge of security protocols and deployment schedules, indicating a mole within the Sentinel organization." Colonel Larson studied the information with professional intensity. "This is consistent with intelligence we've gathered about increased Brotherhood activity in the region, but the level of operational detail they've obtained is deeply concerning." "The secondary facility is our emergency backup power distribution center," Scott explained. "Its location is classified known only to senior Sentinel personnel and NATO command." "Then your leak comes from that limited pool," Miller observed. "Someone with access to both security protocols and classified facility locations." A tense silence fell over the room as the implications became clear. If the mole was among senior leadership, the entire security operation was potentially compromised. Mercer, the British intelligence liaison, spoke for the first time. "We need to identify the source of the leak before we can proceed with any security adjustments. Otherwise, we risk telegraphing our awareness to the Brotherhood." "I suggest a controlled information operation," Emily proposed. "Feed different versions of the response plan to each potential source, then monitor which version reaches the Brotherhood. It's a technique we used in Afghanistan to identify Taliban infiltrators." Colonel Larson nodded approvingly. "A canary trap, effective if we can implement it quickly enough." "We have less than 24 hours before the scheduled attack," Miller reminded them, "and Harrison is still being held by the Brotherhood." "Commander Harrison's situation is unfortunate," Mercer said with professional detachment, "but the security of NATO infrastructure must take priority. We can't divert resources to a rescue operation while facing an imminent attack on critical facilities." Emily understood the cold calculus of the situation even as she chafed against it personally. Harrison would be the first to agree with that assessment. "But once the facilities are secure, I intend to return for him with or without official sanction." Scott looked uncomfortable but didn't contradict her. "Let's focus on preventing the attack first. I'll coordinate with NATO command to implement the canary trap immediately." The meeting proceeded with rapid-fire planning, adjusting security protocols, establishing communication channels, and preparing countermeasures for the anticipated Brotherhood attack. Emily contributed her insight into Brotherhood tactics based on her encounter at the facility, while Miller leveraged his special operations experience to identify potential vulnerabilities in the NATO security perimeter. As they finalized the defensive strategy, Emily's secure device received another message, this one from an unknown source, but using a recognition code that Harrison had established years earlier during their time in Afghanistan. Patriarch arriving 0600, personal oversight of operation. Secondary target is distraction only. Emily showed the message to Miller, who studied it with narrowed eyes. If this is legitimate, it changes everything. The Brotherhood leadership wouldn't risk exposure for a diversionary operation. Unless the diversion is significant enough to warrant personal attention, Emily countered, or unless the Patriarch has objectives beyond the Brotherhood's operational goals. She shared the message with the NATO officials, triggering an immediate reassessment of their defensive strategy. If the attack on the secondary facility was merely a diversion, what was the primary target? There's only one facility more critical than the backup distribution center, Scott said grimly, the central control system for the entire regional grid located beneath the primary power plant. A successful attack there wouldn't just disrupt power, it would potentially allow hostile actors to seize control of the distribution infrastructure across multiple countries, Colonel Larson added. The strategic implications would be catastrophic. Then we adjust our defensive posture accordingly, Emily decided. Visible reinforcement of the secondary facility to maintain the deception while concentrating our actual defensive capabilities at the primary location. The strategy was sound, but a crucial question remained unanswered. Who had sent the warning message? Harrison seemed the obvious source, but he was in Brotherhood custody under heavy guard. Could he have somehow accessed communications equipment, or was someone else using his recognition codes to influence their planning? As the meeting concluded, Emily pulled Miller aside. We need contingency plans for every scenario, including the possibility that the message is Brotherhood disinformation designed to draw us away from the actual target. Agreed, Miller said. I suggest we split our focus. You coordinate the defense of the primary facility with NATO forces, while I maintain surveillance on the secondary location with a rapid response team. And Harrison, Emily asked the question weighted with professional obligation and personal concern. Miller's expression was resolute. I've activated additional contacts, former operators now working private security in the region. They're establishing surveillance on the Brotherhood facility. If an opportunity for extraction presents itself, they'll take it. Emily nodded, grateful for Miller's initiative, but realistic about the chances of success. Harrison's situation remained precarious, with his survival dependent on his continued value to the Brotherhood as leverage or intelligence. As dawn broke over Eastern Europe, NATO and Sentinel forces had positioned themselves according to the revised defensive strategy. Emily stood in the security control center of the primary power plant, monitoring the deployment of personnel and equipment with Colonel Larson. All defensive positions secured, Larson confirmed. The Brotherhood will find more than they bargained for if they attempt to breach this facility. At precisely 0600 hours as predicted, security sensors detected multiple vehicles approaching both the primary and secondary facilities. The Brotherhood attack had begun. From her position in the control center, Emily coordinated the defensive response, directing resources where they were most needed while maintaining communication with Miller at the secondary location. Minimal resistance here, Miller reported. Definitely a diversion. Primary assault force targeting your position. The battle for the power plant was fierce but decisive. NATO forces, forewarned and prepared, repelled the Brotherhood attackers with minimal casualties. By midday, the attack had been completely neutralized, with several Brotherhood operatives captured for interrogation. As Emily debriefed with Colonel Larson in the NATO command, Miller contacted her with unexpected news. We've located Harrison, he reported, his voice tense with urgency, being transported to a secondary Brotherhood facility near the Belarus border. Extraction window is narrow. They'll cross into Belarus within 3 hours, after which recovery becomes virtually impossible. Emily didn't hesitate. I'm on my way. Hold position and continue surveillance. Colonel Larson didn't attempt to dissuade her. Take what resources you need. Consider it repayment for preventing today's attack. With NATO support, Emily assembled a small extraction team. 4 former special operations personnel Miller had recruited, each with specific skills needed for the operation. They moved quickly to intercept the Brotherhood convoy before it could reach the relative safety of Belarus territory. The extraction was surgical and precise. Using the tactics and techniques refined through years of special operations, they disabled the convoy without casualties and recovered Harrison. His condition was stable despite the obvious signs of rough treatment during captivity. Took you long enough. Harrison greeted Emily with a weak smile as she cut through his restraints. Had to save NATO first, she replied, relief evident in her voice despite her professional demeanor. You trained me too well mission before personal concerns. Harrison nodded approvingly. Good call. What's the status on Volkov? Victor escaped during the power plant attack, Emily explained as they moved toward the extraction vehicle. NATO intelligence is tracking him, but he's likely headed back to Russia where he'll be beyond our reach. For now, Bon, Harrison said, his tone suggesting unfinished business. The debriefing at the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw was extensive. Harrison's intelligence, combined with information gathered during the operation, provided a comprehensive picture of the Brotherhood's activities and their connections to Russian intelligence services. The evidence was compelling enough for NATO to formally condemn Russian involvement, triggering diplomatic sanctions and increased security cooperation among alliance members. 3 weeks later, with the immediate crisis resolved and Harrison recovering from his ordeal, Emily stood beside him at Arlington National Cemetery. They had come to visit her father's grave, a simple white headstone that bore witness to a life of service and sacrifice. He would be proud of you, Harrison said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Just as I am. Emily studied the older man's face, seeing the complex emotions beneath his professional exterior. You've carried the weight of his death for too long, Bull. It wasn't your failure. Perhaps, Harrison acknowledged, but completing the mission he started, protecting our allies against the Volkov threat that feels like a kind of redemption. Emily nodded, understanding completely. It's not over, though. Victor is still out there rebuilding his network, planning his next move. Then we'll be ready, Harrison assured her, the next generation of warriors carrying forward the mission. As they walked away from the grave, Emily felt a sense of closure regarding her father's legacy while simultaneously accepting the responsibility that came with it. The Brotherhood had suffered a significant defeat, but the larger conflict continued, a shadow war fought in the spaces between official policy and deniable operations. U.S. intelligence services, now fully aware of the Brotherhood's capabilities and intentions, had authorized a classified task force to track and neutralize the organization's remaining cells. Emily and Harrison would be central to that effort, combining their unique skills and experiences to counter a threat that few understood as well as they did. In Washington, D.C., the National Security Council convened a special session to assess the implications of the Brotherhood operation. The evidence suggested a significant escalation in Russia's use of criminal proxies for strategic objectives, requiring a coordinated response across multiple agencies and international partners. The Volkov Brotherhood has been weakened, but not destroyed. The CIA director briefed the assembled officials. Viktor Volkov has retreated to Russia, where he's reportedly rebuilding his operation with direct support from elements within Russian intelligence services. Our priority must be dismantling his network before he can mount another operation against NATO infrastructure. What resources do we need? The National Security Advisor asked. A specialized team familiar with Brotherhood tactics and personnel, the director replied. I'm recommending Emily Reynolds and William Harrison lead the operational component with full interagency support. The mission was authorized with the highest priority designation, providing Emily and her team with the resources needed to continue the fight against an adversary who had made the critical mistake of underestimating her capabilities. Back in her temporary quarters at Fort Meade, Emily received the operational directive with a sense of grim satisfaction. The Brotherhood had pressed a gun to her head that night in San Diego, thinking they were dealing with an ordinary woman they could intimidate or eliminate. Instead, they had awakened a formidable adversary who would now hunt them to the ends of the earth. Viktor Volkov would soon discover why threatening a Navy SEAL, especially this Navy SEAL, was the worst mistake he could have made.